and we will try and take care of that. All right. And hopefully everyone can see this in a moment. Here we go. All right then, so today we are here together for the next half an hour, and we're going to be talking about stormwater. That's something that we don't talk an awful lot about, and that's really unfortunate because we should. So this presentation is called Being Water Conscious, Landscaping for a Precious Resource. One of the things that we do, unfortunately, is regard stormwater as a waste product, something to be sent off to the magic land of away so that we don't have any difficulties with it. We don't have to worry about it anymore. So I thought I would start out by helping us understand what stormwater is and what it is not, and how we can begin changing our mindset about stormwater runoff. So we always talk about the Earth being a water planet, and we are. We do have quite a bit of water on this planet, but 95% of it is salt water. So we can't drink that water. And then about the remaining 3% of that water on this lovely planet is sweet water, also known as fresh water. But most of that is not available to us for a variety of different reasons. Only about 1% of the fresh water here on Earth is available to us. 1%. I think we are lulled into a sense of complacency in a way, because we live so close to Lake Michigan and we have so many rivers, lakes, and streams around us here in southeastern Wisconsin. And we tend to think that, wow, you know, we have a lot of water, the supply is unending, and so we don't really have to worry about it. But when you put it into perspective, in point of fact, it's one of our most precious resources. Also, when you think about it from a global perspective, even from a perspective of just this particular country, there are a lot of people who don't have access to fresh water. There are a lot of people whose access to fresh water is dwindling for a number of different reasons, one of which, of course, is climate change. There are droughts going on all over the place. So that 1% is for being used by humans for drinking, cooking, bathing, recreation, other kinds of consumption. It's used for agriculture. It's used to manage our own waste products. It's used for industrial applications, and it's also used for power. And I'm sure there are other uses for that 1% that I haven't even put on there that I'm not aware of. So we have very little of it to use, to drink, and to do all of the other things that we do in it and with it. And part of that available water we call stormwater runoff. So what I want to impress upon you this evening is that the kind of stormwater runoff that we experience at this moment in time is a human-created problem. Before everything was modernized, quote unquote, industrialized, and paved over, the water cycle functioned in an intact manner. And so that meant that the vast majority of precipitation, whether that was rain or fog or snow melt, ice melt, actually infiltrated back down underground into the underground aquifers. That's another place that we don't think very much of. We just don't learn about it. We don't, some people don't even realize that we have underground aquifers. In actual fact, very little of it sheet flowed directly into the nearest body of waters. And so the hydrologic cycle, or the water cycle, functioned in a very intact manner. And so there would be precipitation, and then it would be taken up by plants, and it would sink back down underground. There would be a little bit left to go into surface waters. And then, of course, there was evapotranspiration by plants. So, for example, in the summertime, if you were to take a plastic bag and you would put that plastic bag over some leaves toward the ends of a branch and wait for a little while, especially if you're in the sun, you would see quite a bit of condensation in that bag. And so those leaves are giving off water even though you don't see it until you trap it in a plastic bag, which then, of course, travels back up towards the sky and it condenses in the clouds. And then we begin that hydrologic cycle once again. That's how it's supposed to work. That's the intact water cycle. But because of the things that we've done, we have switched that completely. So now, of course, most of what we see is covered by impervious surfaces of various and sundry kinds. And so we have lots and lots of buildings that have big footprints. We have driveways and walkways and sidewalks and parking lots. We have highways and all kinds of multi-lane, expressways. And we have mostly non-functional vegetation at this point. And as a result, water is not able to infiltrate back down underground the way it's supposed to. Instead, it becomes what we call runoff or stormwater runoff. Most of it is conveyed directly back into the nearest receiving body of water. So we have storm drains in our streets and in our parking lots, and the storm water runs directly into those, is conveyed via pipes underground that you don't see, and then there's an outlet somewhere, an outflow into the nearest receiving body of water. So that could be the Root River, the Pike River, it could be Lake Michigan, and anything and everywhere in between. There's a problem with that, though, because as this storm water is sheet flowing over and off of these impervious surfaces, it's picking up all kinds of pollutants that don't belong there and impact quality of life, not only for aquatic species, but all of us. In areas where there are combined storm sewer and storm sewer applications, even though this water would then be conveyed to the water treatment plant, not all of that stuff can be filtered out. In fact, it's filtered out enough for us to have fresh, clean drinking water, but there are a lot of chemicals that can't get filtered out. The plants aren't set up for that. The technology just isn't there. But here in southeastern Wisconsin, in Racine and Kenosha and other places, our storm drains convey it directly to the nearest body of water. And it's easy not to think about it because we don't see it. It's easy not to think about it and consider what's happening with it because we aren't taught about it and, sort of out of sight, out of mind. But stormwater runoff does not exist outside of the water cycle. All the water we have is all the water we have. And stormwater runoff is contained within that equation. It doesn't exist separately, it's within that equation. That's why we have to begin thinking much differently about it. That's why we have to begin addressing it in a much different way than we do now. It's not a waste product, it's a precious resource. It is actually our water. So I said a little bit ago, impervious surfaces. So what are impervious surfaces? So the list is kind of unending, but and anytime you see asphalt, you see cement, sidewalks, parking lots, rooftops, retaining walls, all of those kinds of things are impervious surfaces. And then I also mentioned non-functional vegetation, and it's the vegetation that we've become accustomed to. Grass is essentially an impervious surface. It really does not promote stormwater infiltration. And then we have other non-functional vegetation, like most of the stuff that you see around, all of our non-native plants that exist within the purview of conventional horticulture. You go to Stein's or you go to other places and you buy things that are non-native and put them in the ground, and they're lovely and they're beautiful to look at, but they actually don't do much in terms of water conservation, improving water quality, and conserving this precious resource that we have. They also don't do much in terms of habitat preservation and species preservation. So these are all impervious surfaces. So here's a typical neighborhood. You've got lots of big footprints on tiny little pieces of ground. We've got extensive roof lines. We've got lots of cement in the form of driveways and sidewalks. We've got lots of non-functional, non-native vegetation. We have big streets. And you can see that the downspouts, in most cases, flow directly onto the impervious surface, and then they eventually are conveyed into the stormwater sewer drain that you see kind of in the middle of the picture, and then that goes out to the nearest receiving body of water. Whatever happens to this land here in this subdivision happens to the water. Whatever happens to the land wherever you live actually happens to the water. That's an important concept to remember, because if you remember that, when you go outside to do something to your landscape, you can get an idea of how water is connected to what you do, and what you do is connected to fresh water. So unfortunately, because of all of the things that we do in life, our stormwater runoff contains a lot of things that don't belong in there. Grass clippings are a major problem in terms of stormwater runoff, because when you mow your lawn and the grass clippings end up along the roadway and then end up near that stormwater sewer system, that stormwater grate, when it rains, those grass clippings are carried then directly into the nearest receiving body of water, as are fallen leaves and other yard debris. And what happens when they're carried into the nearest receiving body of water is that they begin to break down, and it causes an over-nutrification. In other words, there's too much stuff in there that promotes algae growth. And when you have too much algae, it eventually upsets the balance in a fresh body of water, so that too much of the oxygen is taken up as it decays, and the bacteria are biodegrading it. And then when you have low oxygen levels, you have die-off of aquatic life. And pretty soon you don't have a fully functioning aquatic system anymore, because too much stuff ended up where it wasn't supposed to go. Then, of course, we think about petrochemicals, and we think about pet waste. So pet waste is a problem because of the bacteria that it contains. And so, E. coli in your nearest lake where you want to go swimming, or the stream where you want to wade around in, can be a problem for a lot of people. And people say, well, I only have one dog. Yes, that's true, but so do millions and millions and millions of other people in this country. And so if people aren't picking up after their dogs, it becomes a major problem in terms of stormwater contamination, and then that contamination carried into the nearest receiving body of water. Petrochemicals, we don't think about them because we don't see them that much, but eventually everyone's car begins to leak at some point. And so there are all kinds of chemicals that are associated with our cars, like oil and gasoline and other kinds of fluids. And when you think about how many cars there are just in the state of Wisconsin alone, if those are leaking onto our driveways and our roadways, and rainwater or snowmelt carries them out into the nearest storm drain, it begins to become a problem. One of the major contaminants within our watersheds is chloride. So chloride comes from de-icers. Those are the things we call snowmelt, ice melt. And unfortunately, chloride is an enormous problem. All of our waterways are highly contaminated with chlorides, and we cannot get those out. Even if our stormwater would go to the nearest treatment plant, the water treatment plant would not be able to filter out chlorides. They don't have the capacity to do that. So chlorides begin to accumulate in your water. And it's only recently that the effect of chloride contamination on fresh water has begun to be studied. And preliminarily, we know that certainly it affects fish size and aquatic animals' ability to reproduce, and a whole host of other things that definitely impact Wisconsin, because people love to fish in Wisconsin. And so it has long-term far-reaching consequences. We can't take the chlorides out that are already in there, but we can certainly reduce the amount going forward that are contaminating our waterways. And we do have chloride contamination from agricultural chemicals as well. Then herbicides, everybody wants to get rid of the weeds in their lawn. Lawns are a real problem for stormwater runoff. And, if a little bit is good, a whole lot more is better. That's what we tend to do. And so we need to begin to ask ourselves, do we really need those herbicides as a lawn application, or could we be doing something better? Could we leave those herbicides in the hands of people who are trying to do native lands management and native land restoration, and who know a little bit more about herbicide application, when and how and why, and all those kinds of things. Pesticides, gosh, it won't be long before we see all kinds of commercials about getting rid of things that are supposed to live in the soil underneath your turf grass. We just simply do not need to be applying that to our lawns. Our soil is supposed to be alive with macro and microbiotic things. That's what makes soil healthy. And the monoculture of lawn that we continue to try and achieve, that turf perfection, is really harming our stormwater, as well as all the other things that are supposed to exist within the soil to make soil healthy and vibrant and support native landscapes. It's maddening to think that this still happens, but people still dump things right into the storm drains, all kinds of things, paint, petrochemicals, who knows what. And of course, it's not legal to do so. Sometimes people do it because they don't understand that storm drain conveys everything to the nearest receiving body of water. And so that's why we endeavor to do storm drain stenciling. Most of the time it says drains directly to lake, so that people can learn, yeah, this is not a good thing to do because it contaminates water, and also it's not legal to do that. Trash is a big problem. Yes, it is. So we produce, I don't know how many billion pounds of trash on an annual basis, and trash begins to be a problem. Sometimes it's because, wind blows things all over the place. Sometimes it's because people dump things purposefully. I've seen couches dumped into streams and creeks, and of course the ubiquitous tires and TVs and all kinds of things. Cigarette butts are a major point of contamination for fresh water. And if any of you in the audience, if you're a smoker, please know that the earth is not supposed to be your ashtray. Dispose of those cigarette butts appropriately. Put them in the trash. Don't throw them on the roadways or in parking lots, or in other places where they're just going to be delivered to the nearest receiving body of water. I'm sure all of us can think about how many times now we have heard about flooding. Just a few short years ago, Burlington flooded like crazy. There were fish swimming up the streets. We have flooding all the time now. And can you just imagine how much is picked up within that flood water? All kinds of things that we probably don't even think about. And then eventually, as that flood water recedes, all of the contaminants that were picked up by that flood water recede back into the nearest receiving body of water, whether it's a lake, a pond, a stream, Lake Michigan, whatever it is. I couldn't even begin to imagine, how many things end up in those areas. It would be really interesting to try and figure that out. So yeah, so stormwater contaminants are, well, probably infinite, but we do have the capacity to minimize, to reduce the impact on our fresh water within the 5 watersheds of the Root-Pike Basin. And it's pretty simple to do, actually. It's pretty simple to do when you change your mindset about stormwater runoff and what it is. It's part of the water cycle, and it's part of that precious resource called fresh water. So this is just to, again, to illustrate what happens when we have so much impervious surface and so much stuff that ends up going into the nearest receiving body of water. There's a way to begin reducing the amount of flooding, actually many ways, and there are many ways to reduce what ends up in that stormwater, and we're going to start talking about that now. Some people decide, so this is an enormous problem. You know, think about all of the contaminants, think about all of the impervious surfaces. I just don't think I can do anything about it. I just think I'm going to give up. But you really should not give up. Don't give up, because there are a whole host of things that you can do to be a watershed warrior. There are a whole host of things that you can do to protect and preserve fresh water. So one of them is to put in a rain barrel. And on March 22nd will be the observance of World Water Day. And the URL for finding about, I think, didn't I put that on this slide? I don't think I did, sorry. If you just Google World Water Day, it'll take you to a website, and there are things going on all around the globe. And also awareness raising, issues that people are facing all over this globe with regard to fresh water, access to fresh water. We begin to think, you know, everybody's like us. We go to the kitchen or we go to the bathroom and we turn on the tap and this beautiful, fresh, clean water comes out. But in point of fact, a great many people all over the world do not have that luxury. And again, all the water we have is all the water we have. And so those of us who have access to it have a responsibility to really begin taking care of it as if it's a valuable and precious resource. On World Water Day, we have a thing going on. It's a rain barrel fundraising sale. And the link for that sale goes live on World Water Day. And we can certainly put this link in the chat room if you haven't done so already, Laura, or you can take a screenshot of the link. Or if you can't do either one of those, you can just get hold of us. Our contact information will be at the end of this presentation, and you can find out how you can sign up to get a rain barrel. Part of the proceeds will go to support Root-Pike Watershed Initiative Network and our efforts to protect and preserve the 5 watersheds within the Root-Pike Basin. It's a pretty cool program, actually. Laura,
If you don't want to, if you do not want to have to think about that date or want a friendly reminder, I have popped in the that URL that you're seeing into the chat box, and if you put in your first name, last name, email, I will send that link to you on that day, so you don't have to remember that date or anything like that, and we can help you out with that. So that is in there. And as a bonus, if you are a current member of Root-Pike WIN, you will get $5 off, which is a nice little incentive. They're all refurbished, so you're saving something from a landfill, which is really awesome. And we also we are also selling composters and any of the materials that it takes to put these items together. If you have a rain barrel but you don't have maybe the spout or something like that, you can buy those through that as well. And then you're helping not only support local water quality projects, but you are becoming a water quality project, which is really awesome.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
So people say, well, why do I need a rain barrel? Isn't that interrupting the water cycle? Shouldn't that rain just go down my spout and onto the ground? No, it shouldn't, actually. So what happens is that when your downspout flows out into your turf grass, or it flows out to your sidewalk or your driveway, most of it just ends up going down into the storm drain and out to the nearest receiving body of water. That's because turf grass is really terrible as a conduit. It's not much of a friend to stormwater, which is our water. And so by sequestering it into a rain barrel, it means that you can do a number of things. You can water plants with it, your garden. You can wash your dog. You can wash your car. You can do all kinds of things with it. And depending upon what kind of roof you have, it's even drinkable. Not from asphalt roofs, but from other roofs. Obviously, you would filter it and all that sort of stuff. But you know, it's very usable water. You can run it off into your rain garden or to your swale garden. There are all kinds of really cool things that you can do with the water collected by a rain barrel that goes a long way toward becoming a watershed warrior. They're really cool. And the water, I don't know if Laura said that, but the rain barrels you're getting are actually repurposed. And so you don't have to leave them looking like they do. You can decorate them, paint them, stencil them, make it a family project. It's a pretty cool thing all the way around. The best thing that you can do for stormwater runoff quality and stormwater runoff quantity is to begin replacing your turf with native species. Again, I just want to say turf grass does virtually nothing in terms of supporting the water cycle and water quality. It just doesn't really allow for infiltration, and I'm going to show you why in just a moment. A lot of people will call up and say, well, I have this big, beautiful shade tree and I can't get my grass to grow under it. Well, there's a reason for that. Turf grass really was never designed to grow in the shade. It's designed to grow in the sun. And so we don't want you to cut your trees down. We want you to keep the trees because shade is a really important, things that produce shade are really important because of the current climate crisis and rising temperatures. Everybody needs shade. Again, that's not something we think about a lot, but I can guarantee you we're going to start thinking about it a whole lot as the years roll on. Most people have this annoying low spot or squishy, spongy, wet spot in their turf grass for whatever reason. And again, it's partly because the roots of turf grass don't do anything for water infiltration. And so it's like, gosh, I keep putting seed down there and it doesn't work, and my lawnmower gets stuck in it and it's all muddy and I can't stand it. Well, the solution to that is to put in native plants. There are native plants for just about every application out there. And once you start putting native plants in, you have a cascade effect of really positive things going on. You have water infiltration. You begin to replace habitat. What you're actually doing is reintroducing native habitat, because long before the vast majority of native plants were eradicated for various reasons, everything, even where your house is, where your place of worship is, where this office is, where Laura and I are standing or sitting, was once covered in native plants. Most of those are long gone. With the efforts of Root-Pike Watershed Initiative Network, a lot of habitats are being reintroduced and will be replete with native plants because they provide essential and critical habitat, and also because they have long-term and impactful benefits in terms of stormwater runoff, water quality, and flood control. So here's what native plants do best. They grow roots. Yes, there's beautiful stuff above ground, absolutely essential, beautiful stuff above ground, all shapes and sizes and colors. But underground is the powerhouse. Underground, when you have a native landscape or even a few native plants, you have this amazing root community. Sometimes their root systems can go 10, 12, 14 feet underground. And that's really important because these root systems create little highways for rainfall, ice melt, and snow melt to follow along deep underground and eventually back down into the underground aquifers where it belongs. Remember, before the water cycle or the hydrologic cycle was interrupted, the vast majority of that rain and snow and ice melt actually didn't sheet flow off into the nearest body of water. It went underground first and then returned via a seep and a little creek and then a bigger creek and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, what we've done is eradicate most of these native plant habitats. here on the left side of your screen is turf grass. So turf grass is essentially kind of like carpeting the earth. And when you pour a glass of water on carpet, it just gets spongy and wet, and it just kind of stays there. Some of it, a lot of it will evaporate, but most of it will just run off into the stormwater sewer system. And so one of the best things that everybody can do is to begin replacing non-native landscapes replete with turf, but with native plants. And there are flowering plants, which are called forbs. There are graminoids or grasses, sedges, trees, shrubs, vines. Again, there's a native species for just about every environment and every habitat here. So, okay, yeah, it's really great to begin replacing all your non-native stuff and your turf grass with native plants, but you can sort of raise the bar quite a bit by putting in a rain garden. Years ago, Root-Pike Watershed Initiative Network had something called the Rain Garden Initiative, and we helped so many people put in rain gardens that can handle an enormous amount of runoff before it ever gets even close to the street. And so a rain garden is actually an engineered bed. And so what happens is that you excavate, it's shallow, but you excavate a flat and level bed for the rain garden. Flat and level are two different things. And then instead of running your downspout onto your driveway, you turn it and run it directly into your rain garden. And your rain garden is planted with a diverse number of native species that love to have periodically wet conditions. And what happens as the plants mature is that their roots go deeper and deeper and deeper, and it conveys that stormwater runoff from your rooftop via your downspout back down underground where it's supposed to go. And eventually, of course, all points lead to Lake Michigan. So that's a rain garden. Other people say, well, I don't want to really work that hard. I'm just going to make a depression in the earth. And that's a swale garden. A bioswale can have a little bit more engineering in it, especially if it's associated with a parking lot or some really big area of impervious surface where you're directing that stormwater runoff into. So a bioswale is not flat and level. It's a depression in the ground. It just is like a valley. So most of the water ends up sort of in the middle of it. And so you plant accordingly. So on the upside of the swale, those are plants that can take drier conditions, but in the middle of the swale are plants that can take wetter conditions, and they're all native plants. So that's another application that you can use native plants to control stormwater runoff. Again, I know I harp on chloride contamination, but it's a really urgent problem in the Root-Pike Watershed Basin. When you use de-icing chemicals, regardless of the chemical, because most of them are chloride-based, we implore you to use far less than you usually do. Your goal simply is to improve traction, not to produce perfection. There should be about 3 inches between the crystals of your chosen chemical. 3 inches is fine. And in fact, a regular coffee mug, just a regular coffee mug that we use every day, is fine enough to do like 10 squares of a regular sidewalk. That's plenty enough a de-icing chemical. There are really no alternatives to this. The major brands are what we have. People are working on developing things that are less impactful, but those are going to be a little bit farther down the road. There are alternatives that aren't de-icing chemicals, so things like birdseed, sand, ashes from your fireplace, all of those kinds of things will increase traction, which is what you want. That's your goal, increase traction. They're not going to get rid of the ice. Shoveling often and early is excellent because it means you don't have to use so much de-icing chemical. The other thing is, and I have mentioned this probably 1,000 times and people are tired of me hearing it, I know, but I'm going to keep saying it, get some ice cleats for your shoes. One of the most common ones is called Yaktrax, and it just, you know, goes over the sole of your shoes, and you will not fall down. I guarantee they will keep you upright even on the iciest of surfaces. Just Google ice cleats or Google Yaktrax, and it'll show you a whole bunch of different kinds and brands and price ranges and all that sort of thing. I want everybody to stop using lawn care. It's amazing to me how much money we spend on lawns every year because we've kind of been convinced to do that, right? Because of marketing. And yet we can't eat it, we can't wear it. Other animals don't eat it. And then we put all this other stuff in with it to kill off grubs and things that belong in the soil, things that turn into essential insects that we need. It's a monoculture. Monocultures don't do anything in terms of habitat protection or restoration or preservation. We just don't need that much lawn. If you have a lawn, don't mow it so often. The roots will get a little bit longer, but nothing like the roots of native plant systems. So please consider A, not using a lawn service, B, not mowing so often, and C, when you do mow, mulch the lawn clippings, leave them within your lawn, compost them, but don't let them go down through the stormwater sewer system. There are alternatives in terms of native plants that you can use to produce a turf-like application that are actually native. And you can also purchase something called no-mow or low-mow lawns. They're not native, but they do have better root systems than traditional turf grass, and you only mow them once or twice a year. So there are alternatives. But a whole native landscape is even better. As I said, there's a native plant for just about every situation. And by native plants, I mean sedges, grasses, forbs, that's the science word for flowering plants, vines, shrubs, trees, those are all native plants. When you begin to plant native plants, they will come. So if you're looking for more birds and butterflies, if you're looking for more native pollinators, these are the plants they need. These are the plants they're hardwired to recognize. These are the plants that have evolved part and parcel alongside them so that they survive and the plants survive. And by the way, native plants produce more nectar, and so a higher quality as well as a higher quantity of nectar than do non-native plants. So if you want to attract hummingbirds, plant the native plants that they need. Okay, so the best things you can do, start converting your turf and your non-natives to natives, and be aware of the impact that you have on fresh water. Again, what happens to the land happens to the water. And so all of us, every single one of us needs to up our game in terms of how we address the land, because that is how we address water. So let's say that you want to put native plants in. There are a host of places to get native plants here in Wisconsin and surrounding areas, because in the 1970s, Wisconsin was the first place to really think about native plants. And thanks to Lori Otto, who's the person who began Wild Ones, which is a national native landscaping organization. Thanks to Lori, we have resources in Wisconsin. So where do you buy native plants? Wild Ones has a native plant sale. Well, I should say their chapters have native plant sales every year. And there is one upcoming for the Racine-Kenosha area Wild Ones chapter. All of the plants will be ordered online this year, and you'll pick them up locally. That doesn't go live until March 1st. And Laura, if you want to pop that link into the chat, that would be great. I didn't have time to pop it in here. So the Root River area chapter, the Ware Nature Center chapter, the Fox River chapter, those are all relatively local areas. They all have native plant sales. Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District has rain garden plants. So if you're thinking about putting in a rain garden, they have all kinds of information for you, and they have plants that you can purchase. Nature centers frequently host native plant sales. Certainly Hawthorne Hollow does. And just go to your local nature center's website and see if they're going to have a native plant sale. I have nurseries that I have used, native plant propagating nurseries that I have used over the years, and I'm happy to recommend some of them to you. Possibility Place in Modine, Illinois. They're just absolutely tops in the biz. Their catalog is a really wonderful education in native plants, and you can download it for free. Just Google Possibility Place and click on download the catalog, and you will be amazed. Taylor Creek Restoration Nursery in Broadhead, they've been around a long time. Again, just like Possibility Place, absolutely top notch. Prairie Future Seed Company is in Sussex. I think Prairie Future Seed Company was our first native plant propagating nursery way back in the 70s. It's a small operation, very high quality seeds and plants. Just obviously just Google them. Agricole Nursery in Evansville, Wisconsin. You can't go wrong. I mean, they are top notch, just like all of the other places I've mentioned. WNE Radke in Germantown, they have lots of native plants to pick from, and they are not necessarily local genotype. In other words, where their native plants come from may not be in Wisconsin or regionally. And I know a lot of people don't care about local genotype species, but it is actually very important in terms of species preservation. Johnson's Nursery is in Menominee Falls. They have lots of native plants from which to pick. Milligers, every once in a while, Milligers will have some natives, like ferns and wild columbine and that sort of thing. You just kind of have to go and see what they have on hand. I would tell you never, never, never to buy native plants at big box stores, simply because they're often not native. They're cultivars. We don't know where they came from. And they don't have much of a knowledge base in terms of native plants. So stick with primarily native plant propagating nurseries, and you really can't go wrong. And then, of course, your local nature centers and your local wildlands chapters. Okay, so how am I doing for time? I know I was supposed to get this in 30 minutes, so hopefully I'm okay. If you would like information about how to become a watershed warrior, how to really care for this precious resource that we have a limited amount of, if you want more information on native plants, please get hold of me at nan@rootpikewin.org. Or if you want to know about invasive species or any kind of other things related to native plant communities, let me know. You can visit our website because we have a page called Go Native, which we will be upgrading very soon with lots of good information. And go to our website anyway, even if you don't go to the Go Native page, find out what we do and why we do it and how we're doing it, and become a member. If you can't put in any plants, you can certainly support organizations that sponsor big reintroduction or restoration projects like we do. Yeah, so that's Stormwater 101.
Yay!
Yay!
So I think with all of this awesome talk about native plant sales, I am sure that everyone's really excited to find out who won. So what I was able to do is pop all of you down quickly as you guys entered into an Excel, and then I used a random number generator on Google to pick numbers between 1 and 33, which was how many people we had throughout the night. And I have the 2 winners. So congratulations go to Linda Grapier and Ruth Perry. Yay! So if you can both private message me your email, I'm sure I have it, but I just want to see it again. And then I will email you over your gift certificates and instructions. So thank you so much for joining us. And then we did have a few questions.
I do. I want to address Mercedes' comments. And Can everybody see what's in the chat or? Okay, so Mercedes said, soil test or start with plants that can live in what we already have and will live and renew each year rather than die because the soils in our yards cannot support the plants. Been there, done that many times. So native landscaping is a totally different philosophy from horticultural or conventional landscaping. Horticultural landscaping says, I've got this plant here that's the new and improved version of hosta or new and improved version of whatever, but it needs different soil. So I'm going to change that soil to match that plant. Whereas in native landscaping, you figure out what kind of soil you have, and then you pick from the hundreds of plants that will survive in that soil. Many of us have heavy soils or clay soils. There are, a couple hundred different plant species that are native that either don't give a hoot or a holler whether it's clay or they'll survive in clay or whatever, but you don't try to make the clay into something that it can't be. Many of us have different kinds of soils within our landscapes. So sometimes if you have a larger size property, you might have wet soil, you might have some loamy soil, you might have some rocky soil. So it's a good idea to really assess the soil that you have and then pick the plants that'll fit there. You don't necessarily need to do a soil test. There's easy ways to figure out what kind of soil you have. And I can email that to you if you're interested in finding out. But yes, so figure out what kind of soil you have and choose the native plants that go with that soil and those light conditions. What other things would you like to ask?
We had a question from Annie M about if you could repeat the chloride, where chloride contaminants come from. She had said maybe you mentioned car leaks.
Right. So chloride contamination comes from several different places. So interestingly enough, one of the places is water softeners. There's an enormous amount of chloride within the discharge of water softeners, and it's really impacting our underground aquifers because they often discharge into septic systems of various kinds. And so that's a big, huge source of chloride contamination. All of the de-icing chemicals we use most commonly cause chloride contamination. Agricultural runoff also causes chloride contamination. Petrochemicals are a different thing. So these are the kinds of chemicals that are a result of, relying on cars. We're a car society. So when we have leaks of all of the kinds of fluids that go into your car, those end up in our waterways as well. It's easiest to see, like when we used to have snow and snow piles have been mounded up into parking lots, and those snow piles begin to look black. All of that stuff is what eventually it's on our roads already, and then it's picked up when the plows go through and pile the soil in parking lots, or not soil, but snow in the parking lots. And then as that melts, that ends up in our waterways as well. So petrochemicals are a different contaminant from chloride contamination. Oh, I love it. Joe, yes. So the other thing that you can do, and I didn't mention this, but if you are doing new construction or you're replacing existing construction on your landscape and you need new sidewalks, new driveway, whatever, please, please, please check out permeable pavers. There are lots of different kinds of permeable surfaces to put in that allow for stormwater infiltration. Increased stormwater infiltration. Thanks, Joe.
We had a question of what should we do with pet waste?
What should you do with pet waste? Should pick it up, put it in a bag, and dispose of it properly. So it goes in your garbage. It eventually ends up in the landfill. There are things called doggy dooley systems, which compost pet waste, and people have tried those successfully, but it does need to be in soil that is lighter, not necessarily in clay soil. But the best thing you can do at this point is pick it up, put it in something, and then dispose of it into the garbage.
And then we had a question from Lynn if clover could be used versus turf.
Yeah, clover's not native, but you could use it. It doesn't have the extensive kind of root system that native plants do. What you don't want to do is keep replicating a monoculture of non-native plants. You want a diverse landscape of native plants. Clover is a nitrogen fixer, but we have native plants that are also nitrogen fixers.
And then from Tina, we have, should municipalities not brine for the roads?
No, municipalities should brine. And that's a whole nother discussion, but yes, municipalities should brine. And I want you to know, I can tell you from having worked with municipalities for the last few years, they are trying really hard to reduce the amount of chloride that they deposit on the roads. They're caught between a rock and a hard place though, because, they don't want people to get hurt and they don't want car accidents happening. And because the viewpoint of the general public is that it has to be perfectly free of ice, if they don't get it perfectly free, they get a lot of complaints. So a lot of technology has gone into improving salting trucks. There's so much new equipment out there, but that equipment is really expensive and municipal budgets are very thin. But they really are trying to put down less de-icers. That's why they do brining, because it uses less material.
I don't know if I've seen any other questions. I did want to share that if you found this interesting, if you want to delve a little bit deeper into rain gardens and how to create your own, or what kind of early spring plants that you can plant, we're having a rain garden event next month, and then in April we're doing spring ephemerals walkthrough. So we'll be in classroom discussing things, and then we're going to go out for a walk and look at some really neat spring ephemeral plants. So if you're interested in any of those, I've popped the link into the chat box for our calendar, and you can take a look there. And we're also going to be doing some stewardship days. So if you are interested in learning how to not only learn about natives, but if you want to learn about the invasive species that you should be removing and how to do that on your own properties, you can come out to one of our stewardship days and help us work on one of our real project restoration sites and take that information home with you. That'd be great. Any other questions?
Hey, Mercedes, if you want to email me, we can talk about why you couldn't get your plants growing.
Can I speak?
Sure.
Okay. We would have a long conversation. I have 45 years of working on my yard and have found what works and what doesn't. And some of them, including planting things that people say I have to worry about them taking over. And I would say, gee, that'd be wonderful if I had to do is trim it. So some yards and soils, because of the age of the place and what has happened, I've planted things that have reproduced, but sometimes it's a real challenge.
How did
So
you prepare your site?
I'm living in a yard, a building that's the building was built about 150 years or so ago.
No, I'm asking, how did you prepare your site to receive your native plants?
I had to plant what would allow to be grown because there wasn't much. This is a commercial building with a lot that has gone through many things of other buildings growing in it and soil. So it even got to the point of feeling that it was contaminated. I'm only a
And
block.
so did the soil testing bear that out?
2 or 3 people who were with Extension and others had said, don't even bother. Because it depended on what part of the yard it would be taken.
Yeah, so if you're going to do native landscaping, we just had a native landscaping class. So if you're going to replace what's growing there, you have to do a site assessment. And that means how much light is there, how wet is the soil. This
That-
is a very Reader's Digest version, and I'm not directing this at you necessarily, Mercedes. I'm directing it at everybody.
I realize.
And then you have to decide what kind of soil you have. Is it heavy? Is it light? Is it in between? Is it wet? Is it dry? All those kinds of things. But the most important step you can do is remove the existing vegetation, because native plants have all of their checks and balances still, and non-native plants do not. Non-native plants came from elsewhere, and when they were removed from elsewhere and planted here, all of their checks and balances are still elsewhere. They're not here anymore. That's why they can get a leg up on our native plants. So the most important step is to thoroughly and completely prepare your site to receive native plants.
That that would
Because oftentimes non-natives will outcompete.
I
The other thing is, it's true that when we have new subdivisions built, they scrape off the topsoil and they sell it back to you sometimes, or they sell it off to somebody else.
did bring
But that's why, but there's ways around it. I mean, new construction, it's kind of nice because there aren't any most of the non-native plants are gone. And if you get things planted right away, you have a leg up on everybody else. Remember, native plant roots go way, way down deep in the ground, far past the topsoil level too. So.
Well, a property I was at before I moved here, which is over 40 years, almost 40 years ago, I was able to do lots of things in the 2 previous yards, convert them, change them, make them very well and do well. But the soil I'm dealing with now, which is limited because the amount of building that's been built here and residual of it's something that is totally away from this conversation. So I appreciate it. I'm just saying there are some places that we can feel like we're knocking our heads against the wall, and we are.
Yeah, one of those places is if you have a very small lot and you have very big buildings or a very big building and it casts building shade, in other words, shades that is completely unchanging, unlike natural shade, you might as well just go with hostas because the vast majority of native woodland plants don't do well in dense, unchanging shade.
Yeah, I mean, there was part of the loved, I'm trying to remember the plant now. I planted it and it started taking over, and somebody made a comment, gee, to take over, and I said, I would be very happy if it did. And, but it was only one section of the yard, so it depended where it was and how. And so I've just learned how to work with it and live with it and control it. For the most part, it's just finding what will grow and figure out where it's best for. Some of it's learning to live with what's called non-native, but it can control it and keep it here and make it look good.
We have a question from Rick, or we have a hand up from Rick.
Great presentation, Nan.
Thank you.
One of the things that I found is that, depending on what type of soil you have, no matter what type of soil, it seems like compost is always a good option to add into it. If you got clay soils, the compost really helps make it more permeable. You got sandy soils, the compost helps provide some nutrient growth as well as just moisture retention. Do you have any suggestions on local places to get good compost?
Yes, I do. And I absolutely 1000% agree with you. Compost is the best thing that you can do for soil. Keep in mind that when we have new subdivisions built or any sort of major construction, they remove that topsoil, which took eons to create from a natural standpoint. And then all of that soil gets really compacted and it's just very deranged. But when you start adding compost to it or composted materials, it begins to heal or amend that soil. And remember that healthy soil has a lot of macro and microbiotic, microscopic kinds of things growing in it, even clay soil, natural clay soil. So you can use good compost. So there's lots of different kinds of good compost, like worm castings, worm compost, compost that you've made. You know, if you look on like Craigslist or whatever, there are a lot of farms who sell their compost that's been aged. Aged compost is really important. I love triple ground or double ground hardwood mulch. Nothing that's painted or dyed, just good triple or double ground hardwood mulch, because it breaks down really quickly and it starts to get that good mycelial content or that mycorrhizal content going back in the soil again. So the other thing, if you have the capacity to do so, if you can have several yards or whatever it is that you need of wood mulch delivered to your property, and if you can let it sit for a year or two and maybe turn it every once in a while, that's just the greatest stuff to really condition soil that's been abused and mistreated over the years. That's really great stuff. There's a there's a mushroom farm out on Highway P and 50, and they sell scads of mushroom compost. That's great stuff. I don't know if they deliver, but they do have it in bags. Yeah, I highly recommend it. It's really good. There's a place on Highway C in Burlington called Erickson's Landscape Supply. They have really great double and triple ground wood mulch and it's really actually fairly cheaply priced. But anywhere you can find double or triple ground wood mulch or good compost is great. People always ask me, what about the city sites for compost? And you just have to be careful because a lot of stuff ends up in there that you don't want. So diseased plant materials, invasive species, and other stuff that you really don't want. You could probably use that, like if you're going to make pathways or whatnot around your native planting or whatever it is that you're doing. Or you can get a whole bunch of that stuff and let it sit for a couple of years, turn it, see if anything starts to sprout. But yeah, it's iffy using those municipal compost supplies just because you don't know what's in it.
Kathy has a question about, she put in a rain garden and the ducks brought in cattails and they took over. Should they leave them or not?
Your rain garden has cattails? Wow. Cattails are not a bad thing because red-winged blackbirds really enjoy cattails. It's easy to control cattails, actually. So controlling cattails, there's several different ways to do it. So you can manipulate the water level. If you have standing water in your rain garden, which you shouldn't, you can drown out cattails. You can keep cutting them down every year because eventually you're going to deplete those carbohydrate stores in their root systems. If you don't have very many, just cut them down to ground level and smother them out. I'm assuming you don't really want to use any herbicides on your garden, but I've never heard of anybody getting cattails in their rain garden, but that's really interesting. Yeah, you don't want them to take over because you want a nice diverse rain garden, I'm assuming. But they are a good red-winged blackbird habitat too. So if you want to email me, I can give you some more information about that. Cattails are really interesting. When you drive past a cattail marsh and you see all that vegetation above the ice and you think it's dead, but it isn't. It's actually continuing respiration, just like it was breathing during the growing season. And so one way to control cattails in a marshland or in a pond or whatever is to get rid of that above the ice or above the water vegetation during the winter. And then it's really difficult for it to survive.
Does
Miss
anybody
Laura, there you go.
else have a question? somebody mentioned that cattails were edible and that Native Americans use the whole plant. And I know that there is a difference between, there's a native cattail and there's a non-native cattail. So that's a little something to think about. But yeah, does anyone else have a question that they'd like to drop in the chat box or come off mute and share?
Yeah, cattails are edible. You just don't want to monoculture cattails in your rain garden. There's a lot of native plants that are edible.
Or you can pick garlic mustard and get it out of the environment and then just eat it.
Yes, you can make pesto out of it.
Take it away.
Yeah, so just one interesting thing, and some of you might be interested in lichens. This February's segment on WGTD, the morning show with Greg Berg, I invited a lichenologist to join us that day. It's just utterly fascinating. If you want to learn a little bit more about lichens, you can just go to the morning show and click on the archives. Yeah, it's really cool. It was a really interesting discussion.
Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it. I think we're gonna shut down this recording and we'll close up the meeting. So thank you again. Please reach out to me or Nan anytime. We would love to hear from you. And we'd love to see you again for Rain Garden 101 or Stewardship Days. And yeah, thank you so much.
Yes, and we look forward to you joining Root-Pike WIN as a member.
Yeah. We do fun perks. You know, last year we had some tree whips that were donated from a project site, and we were able to share those with our members. So we have some fun things that can that will be presented to you over the years as you remember. So yeah.
Yes.
Cool.
All right. Good night, everybody. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
sticking with us.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.